there's tacos after, so there's a taco party, so hopefully we can continue the conversation of the talk there with Johnny and the faculty and with the students. This is one of the few remaining lectures. We have Xiao Weng on April 10, and the substance design, substance design forum on April 12th, and then on the week of the 24, Comunal Taller is joining from Mexico. So that's going to be the last lecture of the semester. And following on the conversations about land, but also all the questions around architecture. We had Armbetsky in the previous lecture, and there was a lot of questioning on what he called an architecture and what is an architecture according to him. Right? So there was a lot of questioning about what architecture can do, what architecture is not doing, and where should we head forward. I think today we are going to be tagging up along those lines. We're really happy to have Johnny here. So we stole him from Columbia University. Johnny is based in Brussels. Columbia flew him in for a symposium on activism, and in the contract they say that he cannot go to any other university. Haha. So we somehow got him here as part of this, first time in the US. So I think getting a bit of New York, it tells you one side of the US. I think coming to Iowa, it tells you a completely different one, but they are all as real and as important. So I think it's a good extrapolation of like very real conditions, material ones that are connected to capitalism, that are connected to development, that are connected to many of the environmental, ecological, and social challenges we have ahead, right? They're all connected somehow, but they look very different in a way, right? Today's lecture, I know Johnny made one exception once for us for a professional practice class where he showed his project, so today there's no images in the presentation. So it's going to be more of a soliloquy or a provocation. I just want to read a couple of lines and I give you a bit of background of Traumnovelle and why we think the work is important, especially for students. Traumnovelle is a militant faction founded by 3 Belgian architects, Léon Drapeau, Manuel Léon Fadjoul, and Johnny Leya. Traumnovelle uses architecture and fiction as analytical, critical, and subversive tools to emphasize contemporary issues and dissect their resolutions. Traumnovelle alternates between cynicism and enthusiasm, all the while advocating for critical thinking in architecture. Traumnovelle champions a multidisciplinary approach with architecture at the crossroads. Traumnovelle distances itself from current forms of naive architecture, I know who's that aimed to, and refuses to glorify the mundane. Traumnovelle sides with those who have not sacrificed ambition and criticism. What is really interesting, and for those of you, like some of the students have a chance to exchange already some ideas with Johnny, and for those of you that have seen at least the webpage or will get a bit more familiar with the work, is how in the generation post-2008, that in a way, I think it's like a prelude to your generation post-2020 with COVID, right? Like that was a crisis that was not as big as the 2020 crisis, but in a way very similar. A lot of interruptions on the systems of production, a lot of interruptions in social relations. There were 2 branches of architecture, one that wanted to continue business as usual, and another one where questioning became the practice of architecture. Right? I think like here at Iowa State, probably we are somewhere in between those two, between some of us that would like for things to maybe remain as they are or not, and other people that are really trying to figure out what to do, right? Because some of these systems are not working and we need to figure out different ways how to engage with them. For that group, I think this is going to be perhaps something that helps us think about our environment and in the ways in which we can instrumentalize architecture to deal with those really urgent questions. Many questions that we cannot even really articulate, right? It takes many years for us to figure out what's the question that we want to answer, right? You will see you won't see any projects, but you can look at their work. I would recommend you to do it. Like, it's quite fantastic what they do, particularly the European and the Belgian context, working in very rough, maybe a non-glamorous industrial context, right? And it's always like trying to find some magic tricks. I think that build on on the history and possibilities of surrealism also that is part of the Belgian context. So without further introduction, Johnny Leya.
Can you hear me properly? Yes, great. Yeah, it's always difficult to talk about after a cruise, that you have like such ease to do that. I will try to still try to do it. So, yeah, good afternoon. Before I begin, I would like to, of course, thank all of you for being here, hopefully for the lecture and also the tacos. The faculty, Cruz, Natalie, and Emma. So I arrived 2 days ago. I was brought to the Culver's to have a burger and then to a review in the studio by Justin. And it was the best welcome that I ever had. So we also I have to confess that we never say no to an invitation. So most of the time it's coming from Italy, but I always find too. So. And there is another reason why we don't say no is while we were doing our first lecture in Roma, we had Nancy Goldring from the office site that told us, yeah, it's great, you should always talk about the things that you know. And we might have missed something because we always talk about the things that we don't know yet and the questions that we have. So we are usually presented, maybe not this time, as a young office, which is some kind of a threat because, you know, when you are presented as a young office or considered by the so-called old people, what they hear is some kind of, baby crying. So we are a young office, and at the same time, we are also coming from Belgium, which is a very tiny country. So basically, it also gives some kind of freedom in which I can do whatever I want, and no one will really listen. So it's great. So Traumnovelle was introduced by this militant faction and all those points that we're trying to tackle, that I won't come back on it. It was founded in 2015, so actually we started during the first 2008 crisis by 3 people, so myself, Leon Drapeau and Manuel, while we were still students in the third year. Somehow we understood that if we wanted to continue or maybe to start to address the issues that were important, we had to create that space by ourselves. When we started the office, and it's also a long story that I had the pleasure to share during the lunchtime, but maybe we can discuss about it later. At the evening, we sat down in a Portuguese bar. We took a napkin, and then we wrote like the 10 issues or 10 questions that we wanted to address. And that leads us to somehow our first project, Eurotopie, that you saw just before. It was just maybe like even too much image. A project that we did for the Belgian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. So at the foundation of the office, we decided to address, let's say, one specific question. There is one Dutch architect. I'm sorry, there will be like plenty of names of European architects that maybe we don't care about, but it's also like, from where I'm coming from Berlage, that was like a Dutch architect, and he had this sentence which is like, to build is to serve. And then the question for us is, but to build what and to serve whom? So for us, we like to say that everything is fiction, which means that the elements that we composed, and architecture is part of it, are all part of this kind of cultural structure. And we need to, that was something that was discussed during the lunch when the question of what is natural or supernatural. This idea of that you have this natural way of things, or like the architecture as just like a natural project, is really dangerous. And for us, it's super important to always remind ourselves that it's a construction in which we can decide to take part or try to change it. So this afternoon, we would like to somehow end a discussion that we had a few years ago with Cruz and Nathalie in Paris, in which after a very useless moment, as we love them, we arrived to the question of, can we try to be, is the answer, shouldn't it be to be useless? So the lecture today is on uselessness. And I'm sure it's not something that maybe is not addressed enough, but let's try to do it. Could uselessness be the key to finally being useful? And that's what we are trying to do. We'll try to see how, through a few concepts or few ways to approach that question, maybe we'll manage to be useful. Yeah. In a lecture given by Natalini, I don't know if you know him, it's like one of the founders of an Italian office called Super Studio. You might have seen some images. He had a lecture to give in the architectural school AA in London, and he said, I will read the quote, "If design is merely an inducement to consume, then we must reject design. If architecture is merely the codifying of the bourgeois models of ownership and society, then we must reject architecture. If architecture and town planning are merely the formalization of present unjust social divisions, then we must reject town planning and its cities, until all design activities are aimed towards meeting primary needs. Until then, design must disappear. We can live without architecture." So yes, again, the question on all of our lips are how to be useful to society. How can architecture be useful? What is architecture? To the later, one of our students in Amsterdam, at the question of what is architecture, said, easy, it's a structure with plumbing. Okay, of course, yeah, that's true. But architecture can also be a bit more than that. For Hans Hollein, another European architect from Vienna, for him it was like everything is architecture. And that's why I guess, history is so important in architecture. It's because unlike most of the time in mathematics, when you have a new building, it's not erasing like the former formula. How to be useful to society and how to be a useful architect. So, knowing that architecture is a luxurious Italian product for the amusement of rich people, is it relevant for it to try to address society? Philip Johnson, that you might know, famously states that architects are luxurious whores. Yeah, so we're still at the beginning of the discussion, so I hope you still have a bit of hope, but yeah, it's fine. So the main issue that we have right now is this urge to be useful, this urge to be efficient, to be productive, so useful to your future employer rather than the general good, useful to the market rather than the ecosystems, useful to the state rather than to society. And somehow usefulness is determined by how much you and we consume. Universities and schools are a threat, where we are, in so much as they act also as devices to prepare useful architects or academics. So I may have to remind you that even if you wanted to be like a very cute, useful architect ready to embrace the market, there are either too many big bad studios or either not enough nice commissions. So this means that your chances of someone allowing you to be useful and do what you want to do are super low. So you can either travel, find a place where you can work as an unpaid CAD monkey, or to, I don't know, think and act. And indeed, the thing that I understood from the US situation is that you might spend your entire life trapped by this architectural debt, because of which you might never allow yourself to say no. So we are facing the biggest threat humankind has ever known, the destruction of the planet, the ecosystems, and even, saying that, we've heard that so many times that it's become like something like empty, but still, construction is responsible for 40% of the CO2. Our planet, and especially Iowa, I think, has been entirely redesigned, leaving no space untouched. But let's not be more guilty than we have to. No one needs architects. And only 5% of the new constructions are planned by architects. So architecture's new fantasy, at least in Belgium, is this usefulness, is this economy of means. So, okay, so you have less money, less whatever, but still find a way to continue to be useful and to do the same projects, but just with more than before. So amongst ourselves, the debate revolves around topics branching from the interest of the market. So it's either circular economy, sustainability, participatory process, labeling. I'm fine with those terms. But still, there are questions like space, labor, politics that are never really kind of addressed. Jan de Wilder, so I have like a lot of European references and especially a lot of Belgian architects. Sorry for that. So Jan de Wilder, he's kind of a famous architect back in Belgium, very naive and mundane. We tried to ask him what is kind of political involvement. And then he quotes an artist called Francis Alice, an amazing artist that is now in Mexico. And he said that sometimes doing something poetic can become political, and sometimes doing something political can become poetic. So for tonight, could we propose instead, sometimes doing something useful can become useless, and sometimes doing something useless can become useful. So maybe architecture should be useless. Useless to the market, useless to the destruction of the planet. Maybe architecture could be something else than just a commodity. Sorry for my French accent. I'm still working on it. I don't speak too fast. Sometimes I tend to rush a bit. It's fine? Cool. Thanks a lot. So we'll now continue and actually start with a definition. And then we'll discuss about the 4 ways to become useless. Through 1, retreat, 2, negation, 3, asceticism, and then operaism. We'll not give you the perfect recipe to be a useful architect for society. So today, together, let's pretend that we need to be useless. So it might be indeed painful for us to face the fact that architecture cannot contribute to the solution of urgent issues. Uselessness is the fact of being of no use, or not knowing, or not working or achieving what is needed. And this definition already raises like so many questions. No use to whom, to what? How do we define what is needed, and should we aim to achieve it? First, retreat. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, Russian architects rediscovered their own culture through foreign publications. It was in the 80s, and learned what had been going on abroad. They discovered Aldo Rossi, maybe Frank Lloyd Wright, and the revolutionary architects from the 70s. At the same time, they were faced with severe stylistic regulations, dire economic conditions, and powerful bureaucracy. Bored by their positions as draftmen in corporate offices, which might be your future, an eclectic collective of self-named paper architects used their free time to work on foreign competitions, especially in Japan. They won a great number of these competitions. Something that Michael Beloff, one of the people from that group, explained by the fact that they were the only ones really working on them, as if their life depended on this useless thing. After that, they achieved like an early international and national recognition. It's funny, but from the West, they were seen and presented by critics as critics of the communist regime, while in Russia, they were presented as national heroes reactivating Russian culture. And they were maybe like a bit of both, but they were just bored architects doing free competitions. So we think that boredom is one of the biggest engines for architects, so let's see what will come out in the future. During their golden years, a duo called Brodsky and Utkin, please write some names down or Google them. They have like fantastic images that you won't see here, but that I will try to describe the best. They produced a project called Ship of Fools that represented the quest of a common vision of a culture which has been destroyed and must be reborn from its ashes. Thanks to the multiple awards, at some point they were invited to the US, to a film studio, a movie studio. And then nothing came out of that. And few months or years after, they discovered one of their projects in this amazing Robin Williams movie, What Dreams May Come. When they came back, they decided to split, and Utkin started a useful office, and Brodsky, from his wooden house in Moscow, started a paper career between art and architecture. So to quote another author, Mladen Stilovic, then it's connected to the question of laziness that maybe you addressed already. Artists from the East were lazy and poor because the entire system of insignificant factors did not exist. Therefore, they had time enough to concentrate on art and laziness. Even when they did produce art, they knew it was in vain. It was nothing. I think that's kind of maybe an interesting point. Another one, Michael Beloff, that was the best. He had amazing projects, amazing drawings, and he won the most of the competitions. At some point, he was invited at the Yokohama 2050 competition, where there was also Jean Nouvel, Remkoulas, and he was completely disgusted by what he saw. And then after that, he decided to go back to Moscow to have an office of him and his partner, and only do Palladian houses because people like Palladio. In both scenarios, the architects decided to retreat from usefulness to uselessness, and then somehow returned to usefulness. Of course, the word retreat brings to mind Toho, that you know better than me, who wrote about his life alone outside of cities while still being actively engaged with cities. He was never actually outside of the system, just at the border, in retreat, but still there in useful uselessness. Then we'll go for the second one, negation. So, negation. I would prefer not to. The radical negation. I would prefer not to. So it's the sentence uttered by Melville fictional character called Bartleby. So this office assistant one day stopped being useful and just answered to all the questions by I would prefer not to, whenever challenged. Even when he was finally asked to leave the office, he answered again, I would prefer not to. This I would prefer not to is somehow like some kind of the most radical possible act in a society where yes is the norm. Every revolution began with a no, because no is this kind of pure uselessness. Rosa Parks, all the activists that even now are just trying to say no. So yes, from the moment you say no, you somehow are defined like being an activist. But no. So yeah. And it is very strangely difficult to find examples of architects who stated, I would prefer not to, as if the profession were all about, yes is more, I would prefer to. A project is a project, and if I don't do it, someone else will do it, right? So most of the time, the situation in architecture is closer to, I would love to, but nobody wants to hire me. Luc Deleu, another Belgian architect, amazing. He started his career in the 70s by two fundamental acts. His first show, just out of school, he printed all the architectural projects that he loved and crossed them out with a black pen as a way of saying that it was the end of architecture. And then the other one, a few years later, he laid on the grass of a city in Belgium a stone on which was written, it was in the 68, the last stone of Belgium. We have built enough. The starting point of his office, called Top Office, was to question our position and duties as architects. For a competition for a new university, he proposed to put the university on 3 aircraft carriers that roam the planet in the aim to grasp what he calls the urbanism. Useless, right? So maybe because most of the clients think so too, or because of personal choice, now Luc Deleu is mainly producing and exhibiting in art galleries. But still, Luc Deleu decided to say, yeah, I would prefer not to. That's something that we can learn, this connection, is that sometimes what is useless for someone can unfortunately be very useful for someone. So let's try again to understand how we can really be useless. Another Bartleby, despite his better judgment, is a French revolutionary architect, Jean-Jacques Lequeux. So in the 10 years, to give you a bit of context, so in the 10 years before the French Revolution, France was a monarchy, then a republic, then an empire, and then a republic. And at each of those changes, the architects had to figure out what's the best column to use, and they panicked. Luc Deleu, so this context, this moment was also the moment in which at the same time they had like a huge discoveries of antiquities that were coming back, and also the discovery of like the countryside and farms. So it just like collapsed together. Every time it was a question of how to reinvent a nation, and the architects had to find a way, keeping in mind that, okay, architects, we are this luxury product, so before we had to find the right columns for those people that have like noble families, but now you have just rich people without being noble, what should I do? And then you have people with a farm, what should I do? Then you have a state, what should I do? And then they kind of tried stuff. So Lequeux, he had like, few ideas, and unfortunately, all his proposals were all rejected. And maybe we can say that the only genius that he had was that he took his collection of projects and before to die, gave it to a national library. And he died just with like, a bag of coffee and then a woman's clothing. So one project that I can share is like in 1794, the year that someone, Robespierre, was killed. There was a competition to do like an arch called the Arch of the People. And his project was describing, like showing Hercules equipped with the symbols of the French Revolution, like a bonnet, a French cock. What's the name for cock? This French animal. What's the name? It's not a chicken, it's the proud chicken.
It's a cockerel.
Peacock. Cockerel. A proud cockerel, so Hercule, the bonnet, then a proud cockerel, like a baguette maybe. And all of this was there. And there, still, you can see on the project, on the competition, the drunken people. Okay, yeah, why? But then, on the back side of this drawing, you have like several things that were written. One of it was, this drawing may save me from the guillotine. One of a LUCA project called Rendezvous sur Bellevue that I invite you to look for was this collection of all possible architecture of his time, trying to make sense of all this mess. So LUCA died kind of anonymous, and still now is called like this barbaric architect. Third one. So, on our quest to be useless, now we have this movement or this definition called asceticism. So the asceticism is a lifestyle characterized by the abstinence from sensual pleasures, often for spiritual goals. The leader of this wonderful useless movement nowadays is Pierre Vittorio Aureli from the office Dogma, taking a step out of the construction industry to reflect on spiritual goals, but in their case, it's architecture for architecture. Not architecture to play with styles or structures, but just this idea of like this dead figure of like the tone planner and the architect. The architecture that they propose is absolutely devoid of any sensual pleasure, and it's an invitation for architects to become somehow monks, creating plans and sections, amazing, similar to those Zen koans, those sentences that, you know, you stop because your reason can't understand, like listen to the sound of one hand clapping. So Dogma's work is beyond utopia and dystopia, just like good and evil are two concepts that don't exist in Zen philosophy. And the question of uselessness is of course difficult because yes, Dogma is useless to real estate, but the office survives by teaching at the AA, where students like here have to pay thousands of pounds for their education. And thanks to the art, which is inclined to transform a radical or cynical project into a commodity. So in a way, the Dogma's work that I invite you to look for if you don't know them is similar to this Duchamp urinoir, you know, a purely autonomous piece of art which can still be perfectly fit into the market. And yeah, because this lecture will remain available, I love Dogma, you're great, and thank you for being super useless in a very nice way. In a fantastic interview, you have two other French architects, Claude Parent and Paul Virilio, from Architecture Principe. They have some amazing videos that you should watch, in which they discuss about concrete and how concrete is the future. You know, it was back then. And at some point, they were explaining that, yeah, and for instance, you know, you have this guy, you know, this Mies van der Rohe, you know, it's all about graphic design. That won't last. It's just a trend. That was in '69. And for them, they were instead reaching out for an architecture of the experience and how people, you know, can experience the space. So as we know, these fascinations amongst architects for Mies as a graphic designer never stopped and might even become bigger in our visual culture. But yeah, Mies was also more than that. So in spite of his alleged usefulness, he was also looking for something completely useless, and because of that, he didn't build so much. So of course, he was a bit of a Bartleby. When the Nazi regime were fully in position, he decided to leave Germany for the US. I would prefer not to. But Philip Johnson, in an interview, is saying that Mies just preferred to not build tilt roofs. Mies, even if he didn't write a lot, was in search of these horizontal churches, a space for this modern man or woman, in a space where people could reconnect with himself or herself. And his most important projects were small patios with just a wall, a grass, a tree, a wall in which you can just like see those leaves. And he was like, in a sense, looking for something that was again not useful. Maybe that's another way to just look for the required square feet, but find another purpose into what you're doing. Then the last one already, but not the least, opéraïsme. So the opéraïste movement it was initiated by Tony Negri and Mario Tronti. They have an amazing book called Empire that I invite you to read, or to, I don't know, do what you want. They defended the idea that social progress must come from the workers who accepted to work with capitalism in order to redefine it. So in opposition to the vision where architects are positioned outside of the system and other utopias or dystopian views can be possible, it's rather how to be inside the system and basically how to try to, sabotage it. We come back to Superstudio from where we started. So Superstudio, you understood it, it's maybe like an office that we appreciate. It was founded in 1916 in Florence, another crisis, and then it was like dissolved, like shut down a decade later. Yeah, there is still like one guy of the Superstudio that is still alive. He's answering to email, so if you want to contact him, please do it. Their views on capitalism are less well known than their colleges, and similarly their anti-architecture views. Because somehow Superstudio, I guess you saw those images of those big white bars in this free country. Sorry, I lost myself. And somehow at some point they said that they withdraw from architecture and that they won't build anything. But still they used like the magazines and they used lectures and some small projects to try to have a critique somehow still within the system. And that's maybe like a side note for us. Superstudio, they were somehow frontally political, and they were also explaining what they were doing. And there is like another Belgian architect, Kirsten Geers, that at some point said that maybe that was the issue. It's part of this silent generation. The issue was that because they were addressing like their political intentions, they were not able to achieve it. But at Traumnovelle, we're still naive enough to at least try to share our thoughts in a frontal way. And let's see where it leads us. The two first projects that Superstudio started were in Florence, and on that I will, for the finishing line. Yeah, me, I have the images in mind, so I'm also like, when I'm reading, I'm seeing them, and I'm also I have to be less excited about what I see. So, the two projects that they started, Superstudio, the first one, they attacked the first symbol of mass domesticity, the sofa. Their proposals was just to have like sofas or domestic furnitures that people were not able to use in a useful way. Through that, it was a way to kind of push people to react to their environment. There is like also a contemporary artist called Charlotte Posenske that is also using some kind of tubes or things, industrial elements, and then trying to say that it's a way for us to react to. But one of the critiques that he said is also that through those useless objects, then it's maybe also just a way to prepare us for the slums of the future. So being completely useless seems to be a very difficult task. Still, as Traumnovelle, that's the position that we are trying to hold, being useless but from the inside. Even if it seems that not being draftsmen, we are still a bit too useful for a cultural world, maybe lecture, to design office spaces. And maybe, yes, we are not useless enough, but we really aim to be useful. And to conclude this lecture, I want to talk about an essay by, he was great before, a Slovenian philosopher, Slavoj Žižek. that is called The Courage of Hopelessness. In that essay, he says that it's only when we lose all hopes that the revolutions will appear. It's a bit like, okay, you smoker, you smoke, and then you can say that, okay, I can stop whenever I want. And then when you have like this cancer, it's like, okay, I stop now. So maybe like one of the work that we have to understand and to do is just to understand that it's this useless and hopeless situation in which we don't even know what will be after, but we just know that somehow it has to stop. So the feature, there's 4 ways of being useless. Share is this kind of, you know it, this really truthful ambition to, at the end of the day, to be truly useful. So we think it is important to always try to be useless or outside, but to keep the will or the wish to share what you have learned to others, to launch something, to try something, to fight as you can with all the tools at your disposals. To be an architect that will be useful to society by claiming his or her uselessness. And of course, being useless is a tactic, a strategy. Like Super Studio saying that they withdraw from architecture, then doing everything but that. And as a very funny way, I will finish with a Sun Tzu quote. All warfare is based on deception, hence we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe that we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe as we are near. Let's all be as useless as possible in order maybe to really be useful. Thank you.
Open to questions from the audience.
We have the written list of names that you talked about.
With pleasure. Yes, with pleasure. Yeah, because that was a lot. I know. I'm sorry for that.
No, it's great.
All part of the frustration that maybe it might be interesting.
Can I ask why you don't show images during presentations?
Yeah, sure. Somehow it happened still as students. There was this moment in which like studios had to present what they were doing, and there was like this technical issue, and they were not able to show images. And somehow then they had to really explain and talk about more, but from what you can see. And you know, to arrive here, okay, I have no image. I can't just try to show you something. I have to try something else. And that's kind of, and it kept like that. But we have things to talk about also on other contexts.
Don't try that in class.
I can say something. Okay, I think especially because you mentioned the AA. Sorry, especially so for the recording. So especially because you mentioned the AA, and I used to teach there, and I've written some rather critical essays about Pier Vittorio. But the first thing I found when I started teaching there that was like disturbing to me, I think is a good example of something that is trying to be useful and ends up being useless. Now this is being recorded, so my old colleagues are going to hate me. But what they used to do, they used to have a fancy end-of-year show in one of the private gardens in the Bloomsbury area of London. And they would have a strawberry table, and it would be one studio's project to design that table, and invariably it became useless because it wasn't as good as that table there.
Yeah.
So what they were trying to do was to show the usefulness of their education, of the theories they'd learned, of the techniques of design that they'd used. but you would end up like with them falling apart and the strawberries falling off them because they tried, we need a parametric table or we need to be sensitive to the grain of the wood. And, I thought that would be a good example of something which is trying to be useful and ends up being useless. Yeah. And then it made me think about the opposite of that, which would be the generic. So lots of things that we have that are useful, they don't need to be designed again. So in some cases, we don't need architects to tell us how to do certain things like housing or to do it again. It doesn't need to be invented. The drawings might be useful, it doesn't need to be invented. And there's a Russian philosopher, Soviet-era philosopher called Ilyenkov, and he talks about this idea of the generic. So he says something like the spoon is almost like a universal, not quite, but like a kind of universal generic thing. And you don't need to invent it, or you don't need to reinvent it. And it's a kind of anonymous, cultural, evolutionary design. So that so that there are things that are useful, but we don't. I think my point, if there is a point to this, is like saying that we too often think that the point of architectural design is to reinvent things that already work perfectly well.
No, absolutely. Again, it's like in most and too many cases, it's a luxury product, architecture, and the world is made without us. But then it's about to see how through our tools and our, mediums, we can then find a way to maybe not trying to. The question is not to redraw that spoon, but to see if there shouldn't be two spoons or or chopsticks maybe
Yes.
in the proposal. Because I guess that most and all of us, we have this idea that we will come with the answers and that the world is waiting for us to save it. And by doing that, we are like a big part of the issue. And still, but that's another topic. I do believe in architecture, even if I said that indeed all the questions that we have, architecture won't solve it, but a lot of the issues that we have are also expressed through architecture. Mm-hmm. And that's where, either from where we can learn, or where we can also try to act a bit in this idea of like this captive audience that we attract by.
Thank you.
And also about what you said, something that it's also something that could have been useful at one time, then is not not useful anymore. And now it's about kind of understanding where we are, what we are looking for, and trying to see if, but not with the starting point that we need architects.
I wanted to ask, where do you think intention comes and plays a role with it? Because you can be intentionally useless and also accidentally useless, and I feel like the intention would kind of change the outcome a lot versus trying to be. It's
a good question, but I think that it's more like in terms of understanding, maybe, or trying to understand what you are aiming for, and trying to understand if it's what's the best way to do it. That's one thing. And then the other one, and that's why I guess I ended on this, I would prefer not to, or this no, is that also at some time you might acknowledge the fact that it's not working. And I don't even know how to continue, what should be done, and it's not working. And I guess that the intention is crucial, but it's more like this ability of, there is this, again, another French, I'm sorry for that, it's like I still have all those European names. Michel Foucault, that was used a lot, 20 years ago, and now, at least in Europe, no one wants to talk about him. But now I can say, I'm really interested, and I love what he's doing, and a lot of text, quite challenging. In one sentence or one interview, he was explaining that he's a philosopher. he was explaining that for him, philosophy is to make visible what is visible. And I like this idea that to make visible what is visible. And then you articulate facts, so there are things that you kind of are there, and how to make them visible. So you don't invent stuff, you just work on that. And so I guess that this idea of intention is, I guess, always there, but yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I can add something in the context of, I'm trying to think of questions that are asked in other lectures. I'm thinking of a Finn question to Aaron in the previous lecture. When he was talking about queer theory, and I'm thinking about critiques of capitalism. I love the industrial architectures, that many of them are like signs of uselessness because they're like abandoned infrastructures that are not used anymore. The landscape become useless in a capitalist system. You cannot extract from it anymore. So in a way, it has, but it's not the intentional one. It's almost like the byproduct. Then I was thinking about the question that Finn had asked Aaron about, the framework of queer theory. And I'm thinking when theories, in the sense of commodification of a theory, right? When a theory is fashionable, I think maybe is when it's less useful in the real sense, because it's when it gets appropriated and turned into something. I think it happens with representation. It happens now here they're dismantling DEI. They're talking about taking away trans rights and so on. And I feel it's because we think of those things as something that can be useful rather than thinking about how it is part of everyday life always. In a way, it becomes impossible to us of thinking about them in their uselessness, in that they are just a way of existing, that you don't have to turn it into a topic in your studio or into, let's say, if you want to think about protecting the environment, it should not be something that is because of climate change. It should be something that you shouldn't destroy your rivers because it's the water you drink, or you shouldn't have to protect certain people because they're humans. You shouldn't kill them, right? And I'm thinking maybe in the sense of that philosophy when you think about architecture, because I think like when we talk about this, I think it's about architecture, but it's not. Architecture is just a manifestation of a system, and maybe how do you articulate that? I think it has to do with that question also. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. It's very clear in my head, but the question of how do you, if it's intentional, and you know that by making it look useful, it will be misused, how do we operate then? Right? Yeah. It's almost like once Natalie and me spent 1 hour discussing with these two artists in Beijing, there were two Danish artists, about if it was possible to do nothing and to produce something that has no value. Like I feel I cannot be exploited when I'm useless to the system, right? I don't represent a commodity. I'm not a salary. I'm not a wage. I'm not, when people say like, this hurricane killed so many people, it was $140 billion in losses. How do you measure life, right? And I'm thinking like in the same, not about uselessness, but nothingness. Like, is it possible? And then how do we articulate that? Because I feel like the moment that you call the lecture about being useless, it's almost like you're giving the trick away, right? And I feel like maybe it's more powerful when our politicians cannot dismantle what we're doing because we haven't named it as such, right? They cannot go to our curriculum and take away what they find problematic because it is in everything we do, right? So how do you see that? I think like when you talk about the generic and your context in Belgium, everything is kind of the generic, right? You don't have to talk about it. Like everything is industrial, a post-industrial landscape. So how do we go about that without commodifying it, without doing what Aureli does with the I don't know how to call that. It's like the austere chic, right? Yeah. Like where it becomes looking austere becomes a brand rather than an economic way to deal with things, right? It's just fashionable to look cheap, even if it's really expensive, right? Like a bunch of French architects, you know, like Muoto and Bruter and all those guys, right? So,
yeah, but I guess that's all my point, is that it's super tricky to reach this uselessness, and to keep in mind that's not the aim, but that when you are trying to, let's say, get out of the market, then there is another market waiting for you. I mean, at the beginning, and we still have like too many projects that are like around like the cultural scene, in which we can have like a lot of decolonial projects, political projects, and then you know, it's nice and fun. And that wasn't our intention. And so we are really trying to, then addressing those questions into like very different fields where those questions were not addressed. Here, I guess it's 4 kind of strategies to manage that. And indeed, to give the name and to give the tricks is also a strategy here. I guess that maybe one of the most important points for me, at least, that I wanted to share is that to understand to whom you want to be useful, and to understand or to try to find ways in which you can then be useful, by having in mind that maybe the aim is not usefulness, but rather trying to, how can I get out of that? Which is super challenging, and I have to say that we are too often way too useful, but... And as you said, the issue is that when you have like a lot of concepts or theories, and then if we talk about decolonial theories, then they are like moved to a theoretical level, but things they have to always be kept to the ground and to find ways to articulate both. And I do believe that in this work of articulating, we might I believe that that's one of the tools that architecture can have in this.
I just wanted to add another example that might be useful to think with, which is the design of park benches or benches in public spaces or in the city that you cannot lay down on. So they become useless for the purposes that people have found for them, because people are homeless or unhoused, however you want to say it. But they become useful because they're being used to clear unhoused people from the city, because they don't look how some people want the city to look. So I think my point from that is that I'm going to be very Marxist 101, but like the use value of a bench is, you can sit on it and you can lie down on it. But for capitalism warps use values to the extent where you have things like a bench which you cannot lay down on. So it works against people's kind of instincts and the inventions they come up with. The other example, we can see it everywhere, we can see it in Des Moines, is people like to use the city for skateboarding. We don't want that, so we'll make it so you can't use it. So people can be quite inventive about how you can use space, but then there's like a counterpoint to that. So again, as I say, I think just my point is like we have use values which will vary culturally and historically, but not that much, Go back to my example of a table, So we might have low tables and high tables and big tables and tables for 2 people, but we have tables and we have chairs. But what capitalism does is kind of really warp. It has its exchange values, but it really warps what a use value is, because suddenly, like, making an object useless to someone becomes a use value for capitalism.
And I guess to relate to that, it's really about okay, to find a right answer to a bad question is really bad.
Yeah.
And that guy that came with the question, how can we make like a bench on which people can't lie down? I have an idea.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
Yes.
So,
And I think like, I just wanted to add maybe before we wrap up, in the context of the university, I think this is such an important question where we like here and in many universities have departments like liberal arts and sciences that are deemed as useless by politicians, and they get defunded, and that's the only spaces where you can question this, why a bench is where people cannot lie there, right? While when you're very useful and you can build rockets and you can develop software to extract, capital or accumulate capital for somebody, you get all the funding in the world to do that, right? So, in a way, where is the space in society for uselessness, right? Like, are you allowed to think, or is anything that you think has to be turned into something that you can add numbers as a value, right? And I think like the question of architecture more in general in education, right? Like even in architecture too, like what type of architect can you be? Can you be a useless architect that is allowed to think about, maybe I shouldn't do that bench in the first place, right? Like, as you say, like a good answer to a terrible question is not necessarily good. Same with prisons or whatever. So there's a great way to maybe continue the conversation. Over tacos. Are tacos useful?
yeah,
Thank you very much.
thank you.